cool. Marek, let's do it.
Let's
Marek,
go.
hello.
Hey,
Welcome
Quentin.
to the podcast.
Thank you.
Got to talk about that first. You've got a blue thing on your arm.
I mean, it's not exactly Fluence branded blue, but they
close.
gave me a blue plaster, which is good. What do you want to know about it?
I want to know. I don't know. It's pointing at me. How did he get it?
Well, so I've been over in London for a few days of business before coming up here, and I don't normally get to play much sport on my business travels, but a friend invited me to a five-a-side game. I came not properly equipped. I had my running shoes from the gym. We were playing on a five-a-side field in the rain, very slippery, and I slipped and skinned my arm a little bit. It looks quite gory without the plaster. So
no.
the plaster is for the enjoyment of the viewer, so you don't get like a very scary red patch on my arm.
No, it all looks good from here. So welcome to Modo, firstly. Welcome to Birmingham. Thanks for coming up to see us. I guess anyone who's watching this, we've got Marek on from Fluence, wearing all the Fluence gear. We're going to talk about Fluence's, well, what does Fluence do, who backs them, the IPO, and then we're going to go down to rabbit holes because you've been in energy storage for a long time and you know a lot of stuff. So let's do it. So firstly, who are you, Marek, for everyone who's listening or watching?
Who am I? Well, it's an existential question, but
let's go with that version.
What really is being? No, that'll maybe take us down the wrong rabbit hole too early.
So up for this conversation, but yeah.
So would I be. But anyway, so I'm Marek. I'm currently managing director at Fluence. So I lead basically the sales team for UK, Ireland, and Israel, which might be a little bit of a weird pairing conversation, but basically overseeing everything from sort of origination of energy storage projects, filtering through the many hundreds and hundreds of different RFP requests that we have, finding the ones that we can support and respond to, and then hopefully converting those into actually energy storage product sales, software sales, and services sales. So standing behind the systems that we build and deliver for the long haul, 10, 15, 20 plus years.
Okay, cool. And you've been doing energy storage stuff for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been around. And so what have you been doing?
So brief potted history, I guess, of my career in energy storage. So directly in battery energy storage, maybe about 10 years. If you count it from the sort of the longest timeline since about 2009. So actually more like, would it be 13 years, 14 years? So I did a PhD in industry, basically.
But before Fluence even existed.
This is before Fluence, yeah. So sorry, Fluence, well, we're working backwards here. So Fluence was founded in 2018.
Yeah.
Before that, I worked in AES Energy Storage, which was one of the predecessor companies that formed.
On your left breast, you've got AES. Yeah.
Unless the camera reverses.
Yeah. On the right breast, you've got Siemens.
Thanks for looking at my breasts on camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I worked for one half of the joint venture before we were formed in 2018. Again, on the sort of technology sales side, so doing something very similar to what I do now at Fluence, but within what was then AES Energy Storage.
Yep.
And going back further beyond that, I was actually on the development side. So I sat in really the customer's side of the table for the first few years of my career after the PhD, developing one of the very first battery projects in Europe. So a 10 megawatt facility at Kilroot, which is these days not a very impressive size of project, but back then there hadn't been a single commercial battery storage project.
Wasn't that the one that was like at a power station,
Yeah.
like a conventional power station, and then the picture of it was always the corner?
Yeah,
It was
that's the one.
It was like a perfect 45-degree angle of the corner of the power station, and it said,
Yeah.
I don't know, battery thing on it, or AES thing. Is that right?
That's the one.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, so it came a year after Leighton Buzzard, which for if those aren't familiar in the industry of Leighton Buzzard, that was probably the first sort of battery storage project that was built at scale. But we say first commercial because Leighton Buzzard was taxpayer funded predominantly with taxpayer money. The one done by AES was a investment committee approved project on a return on investment basis, right? Putting aside an IRR and business case for it.
We're still doing this the wrong way around. So you were talking about your PhD. So you're a doctor?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Marek, which I don't use very often, but except in like email signatures and formal letters when I'm complaining to people about stuff.
Yeah, I'd use it all the time. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we've worked backwards from the front, and then I started from the other end. So, engineer by background, did a master's in that. And then really actually in about 2008, 2009, I was about to graduate from my engineering master's, was going to go into actually sustainable building. So I'm a civil engineer by background as opposed to energy or electrical, as you might think, given the industry I'm now in.
Yep.
But I had to do a pretty early personal career pivot because I graduated at the height of the financial crash and the recession, and construction was hit pretty hard. So the job that I was going to go into, I had a job offer in hand. I was about to start, and they called me up and basically said, "Yeah, you're fired." Before I started, so I had to scramble.
That was not in batteries.
That was not in batteries. No, it was going to be in. It was at a sort of prestigious engineering consultancy who I'll remain nameless. Although if you went and looked at my LinkedIn profile, you'd probably figure it out. And they, essentially, it would have been designing cool buildings, hotels, theaters, art galleries, that kind of thing, which was kind of interesting. And I always liked the sustainability angle of it. But
this is way better.
The door slammed on me, and it ended up opening a door to something much, much, I think, more impactful and meaningful and interesting. So that led to the PhD, the engineering doctorate, which I did essentially in a similar field to what I do now. So looking at what are the problems or challenges with renewable energy intermittency, which at that time, you go back 10 years, it wasn't a huge percentage of the energy generation on the power grid, but there were lots of papers saying, you can't go above 10%, it will crash the power grid. Well, then 20%, and we just keep going up and up. So looked at the challenges of it and then really focused on what are some of the solutions. And the thesis itself that I did wasn't actually so much on energy storage. That was like a side note to it of saying, hey, there are also these things called batteries that could help solve these problems. Largely, it was actually looking at what can you do to make thermal power plants more flexible and more efficient, ramp up and down better, make more room for wind on the grid, that kind of thing.
And then so you went from that straight into AES, was it? Straight
into AES. AES actually sponsored the PhD.
Okay.
So I worked for them for 4 years doing that research, and then after that I had an advisory sort of position. I sort of landed pretty fortunately on my feet. They didn't really know where to put me, I think, but I had a role reporting directly to the president of what was then AES UK and Ireland. Worked on various commercial strategic projects and things, strategy stuff, but the one that I just had a big break on was that the senior business developer that was leading the battery project at that time left the company, and I was asked would I step in, and I said hell yes.
Sweet. And then here we are. So
and here we are 10 years later.
And so who's Fluence? Who's the company on your t-shirt?
So Fluence is now a listed company. So IPO'd last October, and
listed where?
New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ.
Okay.
Sorry, New York. No, I said the wrong thing. NASDAQ is different to the New York Stock Exchange, isn't it? On the NASDAQ.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's a listed company. And what does Fluence do?
So we're a technology and energy storage product company. So breaking that down to bits, we have energy storage products. So we basically design, install, deliver big scale battery systems for helping integrate renewables to the grid. But we have in-house a big software team. So the controls, the integration of those sort of core components and products is part of what we do. And then also there's now increasingly this growing layer of software and the digital piece. So we acquired it would be end of 2020, a company called AMS in the US. That's now become Fluence Digital, and it's a very, very fast growing part of the business. It is basically a software platform that's helping decide basically how to dispatch batteries in the most effective way, and not just batteries for Fluence, but third-party systems.
So it's like an optimizer in the States. But a very big one and a very technology-driven one.
Essentially, yeah. So very much at the sort of AI-enabled machine learning end of the spectrum, as opposed to sort of having a trading team or anything like that. It's not so much a trading desk operation. It's finding markets where there are very, very fast decisions to be made, and the California market and Australian markets are very interesting for that reason. Like Australia, for instance, 5-minute settlement periods now. So there's no human trader that can recalculate everything with all these different parameters of renewables, battery constraints, and everything in 5 minutes, right? So that's a large part of what we do as well, providing essentially the tools to make better money out of those batteries, which of course is not a sexy topic, but the more money you make from them, the more investment's going to flow in, and the faster we build more storage to help accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. Okay,
and then just for an idea of scale for the people who are listening or watching. So Fluence, how many people are there? How big is it? How many batteries do you have to do you install in a year? That kind of thing.
All great
top
questions.
Trumps card of Fluence.
Top trumps card. So we are actually the market leader in grid scale energy storage, and it's not us saying that, right? It's independent analysts. So
globally.
Globally, yeah. We're Clean Horizon, IHS Market, Navigant, which is now Guidehouse Insights. They're all sort of analysts that look at the sector, and they generally recognize us as the market leader by megawatts deployed. So we have about 3.6 gigawatts of battery energy storage now, either operational or awarded, so contracts awarded in construction around the world. And
So
then
for reference, that's like 2.5 times all the batteries installed in the UK, in Great Britain.
yeah.
Okay.
Something like that. And then on the digital side of thing, which I was talking about, that's growing very fast as well. And I think, I don't remember the exact number that is, but I know if you add the two together, it's over 8 gigawatts. So if you add up what we're doing on the software and digital side, as well as the hardware side, it's 8 gigawatts of assets essentially that we're either delivering or managing.
Wow. Okay, makes sense. And you IPO'd very recently, right?
Yeah.
That sounds fun, doing an IPO. There's a second company we've spoken to on the podcast about doing an IPO. The first one was Harmony Energy, a very different type of IPO. And then you guys, were you there? Were you in the States? Did you ring the bell?
Because of COVID and the travel restrictions, I wasn't there in person. I was, if you look at the video, I was on video and like one of the little like squares. So we had people join from all over the world to join in for the IPO. I didn't go in person, but yeah, it was. As was described, I can't remember who it was, I think it's Canary Media, described it as a proper old-fashioned IPO, not a SPAC.
Yeah.
So quite different in this industry, but obviously a great way to raise a lot of capital quickly. We raised about $1 billion from it, and we're putting that to good use to growing the company as fast as possible in all sorts of areas to help with this, the mission that we have, which is to transform the way we power the world.
Okay, awesome. So we're now going to move away from Fluence, and we can talk about your experience at Fluence, but I want to ask some very targeted questions because times are odd right now, and I want to talk about supply chains first. Mm-hmm. So what is going on in supply chains for battery energy storage right now? And we are in March 2022 for anybody listening.
What isn't going on in battery storage supply chains at the moment? I think the word unprecedented is thrown around a lot, but it's pretty unprecedented times. So, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about what's been going on in the past, because the context and history is important. There's been, I guess, a general expectation, and generally it has been true over the last 10 years, that there's just been steady declines in the cost of energy storage technology. So an energy storage product is not just the batteries. Batteries obviously a key component of it, but the software, the controls, the inverters, the safety systems, cooling systems, integration of everything, right? There's more bits to it than just the batteries. But generally, the batteries have been the most expensive part of an overall system. And
what percentage of an overall system is the set? I'm jumping in here before you've even finished the sentence, so sorry. But of an overall grid scale energy storage system that Fluence will install, what percentage of that is cells in cost?
So it's hard. First of all, it's hard to specifically break down that, because one, it depends on the duration, right, of the system, the power to energy ratio.
Yep.
The higher the energy ratio, the more duration the batteries have, the more the percentage is going to be. And the second is what actually you measuring as the percentage, because when you say cells, like there's cells, there's packs, there's modules, there's racks, there's BMS, right? What are you including in that number? That's one big variable. And then the other is, what are you comparing as your total cost, right? Is it the product cost, or is it the turnkey EPC cost, civil works, the electrical grid works? Because all of those vary a lot. So I'm sorry for giving a very it depends answer.
That's useful as a thing, because our industry, lots of industries, but specifically our industry, because it's maturing, has got lots of new rules of thumb that get thrown around, and it's good to know that the answers are often more nuanced for good reason.
They are far more nuanced, and one of I guess the frustrations we have, and it's a data transparency thing, right? Most customers, unless they pay for access to very detailed breakdown reports, they'll Google stuff and they'll go, there's the Bloomberg battery curve, and this is the cost per kilowatt hour per year, but they don't have a reference of what that cost is for, and it's really driven around EVs, and it's not driven around stationary energy storage, and the two are different. So when they see a benchmark price, they think that that's the benchmark cell cost that's going into an energy storage system, and it's not. It's an aggregation of many different industries and sectors, all of which have different structures, different makeups, and the way that EV packs or modules or cells are structured in terms of cost is quite different to the way they're put into a stationary storage system.
So beware this number goes down graph on cell cost. But let's come back. I jumped ahead of you, sorry. So you were saying, I asked you what's happening in supply chains, and you were saying, well, prices have been coming down, but...
Historically, yes. So they had been, and that's largely been driven by the battery component. There isn't really as much of a cost decline in anything else, right? If you imagine what are the other costs that go into a system, right? There's inverters. There's maybe some learning curves in inverters, but in general, they're a more mature technology.
Because we've been using them for years on solar, right?
Exactly.
And other stuff.
So there's not really major declines there, and in fact, as I say, we're now we've reached an inflection point where we've got, again, it's one of those common phrases, the perfect storm, right? But there's a lot of things that have gone the wrong way quite quickly. So one, we've had a pandemic for the last few years. That's disrupted supply chains. It's had lockdowns for factories. It affects shipping of raw materials. So a whole bunch of impacts there that then start pushing costs up on supply chain. And then more recently, we've had war in Ukraine, which in the last month or last couple of months is really exacerbating that further, because things like steel, which are produced in Russia, is now there's a lot more sanctions in place, and you can't get a lot of
nickel, right? Let's talk nickel for a second.
Yeah.
So nickel's used in cell. Are they used in Fluence? The cells that Fluence uses?
So Fluence is technology agnostic. So we're not a battery OEM, and we are not tied to any one single chemistry, single one supplier. So nickel is used in NMC batteries, nickel, manganese, cobalt, of which there are also many different subtypes, right? So you have in NMC, it's commonly denoted by 3 numbers. So there's NMC, which is 111. That means sort of equal ratio in the cathode of the battery of nickel, cobalt, manganese. But then you have 811, which is like 80% of it is nickel, 10% cobalt, 10% manganese, right? So the ratio
that sounds
of
expensive,
nickel.
One of those now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, those were forward prices. So what you're referencing there with the spike in nickel were what will it cost to buy nickel in, I don't know exactly when it was, like, a year from now.
Yeah.
So forward prices are volatile and sensitive. And recently that's been happening not just with nickel, but with a lot of things, right? Copper, steel. So all raw materials, lithium carbonate has increased like 500% in 6 months. So all these things are quite volatile, and they're generally going up, which is then impacting energy storage, total system and product costs. So as opposed to costs now going down year on year, they've actually inflected and they're going up.
So raw material costs, so the bits that go into the battery are going up in price.
Yeah.
Because of lots of reasons. What about actually assembling the batteries and shipping them? Because we've also got squeezes on those elements.
Yeah.
What's happening there? And then, if you wouldn't mind, how does that impact you and your customers? Because you've got to sell these things and build these things.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good question as well, right? How they're manufactured and where and how they're shipped. So shipping and logistics was sort of the first thing I mentioned, because before all these commodity impacts took place, and again, it's not just commodity impacts. Partly we'll get into the positive side of this story, which is actually, I think, a bigger positive than the negative because it outweighs it.
Going to bank that for 5 minutes time.
Yeah, we'll come back to it, but it's basically demand. The other reason that this is driving up is that there's only so much energy storage, battery cell production versus the demand that's out there in stationary storage, in electric vehicles, in consumer electronics, everything we use lithium-ion batteries for. And that's the other reason that's going up, supply-demand dynamics. But put aside that piece.
Which is nuts, by the way, because I've heard so many very top product, research companies jump up and down about overproduction and oversupply of gigafactories, and the fact that we're, in the last few years, maybe the timing's been wrong, but there's certainly a squeeze at the moment. And considering there was supposed to be this battery glut 3 years ago, people were saying by now there'll be a battery glut, and it just hasn't happened.
I mean, timing is everything, right? So the demand maybe has grown faster than the supply expected. It is expected to be a short-term trend. I'm not an industry analyst that looks at this day to day in a lot of detail, but there are a lot of gigafactories coming online. They're just not online yet.
Yeah, okay.
So in 2 years, maybe this problem may go away. Maybe it's going to be the opposite problem, oversupply again, and things rebalance and go the other way. But in the short term, it has been a definite squeeze. And so as it comes to what we're doing about that, one of the elements is actually we aren't vertically integrated. So if you are vertically integrated as an energy storage...
What does that mean, sorry, vertically integrated?
So that basically means that you're building your energy storage system around one specific chemistry, one specific OEM, and optimizing around that. And there are advantages of that.
What sort of company would you describe as virtually? Virtually and vertically.
Virtually integrated. I mean, so a well-known example and competitor to us would be a company that launches cars into space.
Tesla.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So vertically integrated.
Yeah.
Because what does that mean?
So it means that they're building their systems around.
Don't worry. I know everyone knows you're not bashing Tesla here. So you don't. Yeah.
No, of course not. Yeah. Elon, I love you. We're all rowing in the same direction. Put it that way. And competition is healthy. But so there's vertical integration building around a specific cell, building modules, battery container, everything else around it. It means that in general the technology is more fixed, right? You can't switch out for a different battery supplier because of the way that systems are built around a specific form factor. Yeah. So we've deliberately taken the opposite route of sort of what we would describe as technology agnostic approach. I would say it's probably battery agnostic, right? We're technically not tied to any one chemistry. We can use the same cube that we have, like the building block of our product, will take an LFP battery cell, it will take an NMC battery cell. So either one of them can be used in it. We also have, like, if you look sort of forward, there's been announcements, right? We have Northvolt as a alliance of Europe's first gigafactory. We have QuantumScape looking further out, solid state batteries. So the idea and philosophy of how we've designed our system is deliberately to be flexible between which batteries we choose, which means we are better insulated against some of those supply chain constraints, because if supplier A can't deliver capacity, we can switch to supplier B.
And so if nickel's a bazillion times more now than it was before, then you can switch away from NMC. Is that the kind of thing you can do?
That's part of it, and then the other part is even geographical as well. If you look at if there are shipping constraints and shipping remains very expensive from China or from Asia to Europe, building in Europe actually then has an advantage because you remove that volatility, and two, those costs. So we are also moving in the direction of regional manufacturing hubs. So we have production facilities, contract manufacturers for the cube product that we build, not just in Asia now, it's coming on stream in Europe and in the US.
Can I ask you a question, right? So you guys, Fluence, you've got the cube, Tesla have got the cube thing, Megapack. There's these new form factors coming out, but most of us are used to seeing batteries in shipping containers, so 40-foot shipping containers. Isn't it easier to do it in shipping containers? Doesn't it make more sense to do it in shipping containers? Because how many times can I say shipping container in this one monologue? I don't know. Let's see. But in a shipping container, it's very easy to move it around the world because it is designed for shipping. No container on that bit. And you'd think that you can squash more stuff in there. So doesn't that make sense? Why do it differently?
So we've actually been through now 6 different generations of technology through Fluence and its predecessor. So AES, actually, if we go right back to the beginning of the origins of the energy storage business as we know it, built the very first grid scale battery anywhere in the world, like first megawatt scale battery connected to electricity.
Okay, we're going to have to fact check that somewhere. It sounds like it could be true, and it probably is true in some way. I just want to check that that's absolutely true.
Please do.
Yeah.
But it was, so right back at the very beginning. I can't remember exactly when it was connected, because the very, very origins of AES energy storage were about 2006, 2007. Yeah. I think that project was completed in 2008. Okay. So we're talking now 14 plus years ago, right? It's a long time.
Stone Age.
But yeah. putting that aside, that wasn't really my point. That was you focus too much in on the specific humble brag.
This gets me excited when these things happen. Sorry, carry on.
Anyway, so that was generation 1, and yeah. I can't name all of the generations, because actually when I started working for what was then AES Energy Storage, now Fluence, we were on the 4th generation of design, where at that point we were putting energy storage in buildings. And the reason for that was that there wasn't really standardization in this sort of shipping form factor, 40-foot containers. And because batteries were so expensive, actually building buildings around them was a more cost-effective solution in terms of how it was set up. And so we had a very different structure with Gen 4. We moved to Generation 5, which was basically the shipping container structure. You'd kit out your shipping container with racks, with some of the initial equipment, but then you would have to ship the shipping containers to site, the batteries separately to site, assemble it on site, integrate the controls and everything on site, and do a lot of that work in the field. So it sounds like it would be better, but the problem is with a 45-foot container, you can't ship it with the batteries in. There's too many batteries. From a safety perspective,
they came in a wanna now. I thought they all turned up as a wanna, and you just sort of. I knew in the olden days you had to ship them separately, but I think some of the new ones they're configured in a factory. Just lift them on and away they go.
From a weight and a for safety perspective, you can't carry that many batteries together. So what people are doing, and this is true whether you build, the cube. So our cube is a very modular form factor. It's about, depends if you prefer feet or meters here, 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot. It's about 2.5 5 meters, I think.
As
Roughly.
an answer to that question, I feel like I should prefer meters, but there's something exotic about feet.
There is, isn't there? So like,
I think it'd be exciting about
alienates the non-UK audience. Actually, no, the US likes it as well.
Loves it too.
Yeah,
I'm absolutely boiling.
Furlongs and everything
furlong,
else.
we should go back to the. No, I'm not.
How many furlongs does your battery take in a row? So anyway, so we have a block size like that, which is then fully factory built.
Yeah.
So because we're dealing with a smaller block size, the unit size of this cube is small and agile enough that you can forklift it. You don't need a crane to lift it. You can actually lift it with a forklift truck. It's only about 8.5 tons, and you can put in all your safety features, your cooling system, your controls, your batteries, everything in the factory. Test it in a factory environment, production line environment. And then that's basically been pre-quality assured before you bring it then to a site. So when it comes to site, all you've then got to do is plonk these onto the foundations and connect them cube to cube. So the shipping, installation, everything else becomes a lot cheaper, and the commissioning time on site is significantly reduced as well.
Less cost, better quality is the argument.
That is basically the rationale, and you still do ship it, to your point, in a 40-foot container. So basically you put the cubes inside, they're sort of, just exactly describe it like factory packed. I guess it's pretty similar to when you get an Amazon parcel or whatever, to protect the sides and everything, but you ship them three to a 40-foot container and deliver them that way. But the difference is then you're no longer having to figure out how to install the batteries on site separately, and then also the things that you used to have to do on site separately, like the cooling system and integrating that there, has already been done. So it just makes things quicker, faster, cheaper. And from moving from our 5th generation to 6th generation design, there was something like a 30% reduction in the cost of the balance of systems, so the non-battery component, by doing that. So a lot of people have now copied it, as you might expect.
So we're going to see more non-40-foot container batteries maybe in the future. Yeah. All right, I'm going to say something highly triggering now, and I'm going to see how you
triggering
respond.
For you or triggering for
me? Triggering for you, I think. I'm going to say lithium-ion is good for short-duration batteries.
I'm triggered already.
but how on earth are you going to solve the problem of long duration? Because surely that's just flow batteries and other stuff.
There's some nuance to the response to that, but you're right.
Let's see what happens now.
So, what does long duration mean?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know, because everyone's got a different answer. I think the answer is anything above 4 hours is long duration, but I could probably find people to argue 3 or 2, even above 2, and then other people to say, oh, it's not seasonal. The only thing that really matters is seasonal. If we don't build seasonal, the lights are going to go out, which is probably true, but quite upsetting.
Yeah, it is a little bit. And I think the definition that you've used is sort of like there isn't a standard agreed definition. It's part of the problem. And I have long been saying that for 2+ years now, please specify what you mean by long duration storage, because it is often used by essentially the non-lithium ion lobby. So any other technology, any other company out there will say, yeah, lithium ion can't do long duration. Now, if you take the 4-hour definition, I think everybody agrees lithium ion is a great technology for 4 hours and less. The controversial, if you call it no man's land, middle zone is at the moment 4 to 8 hours, where there's been an argument that, flow, compressed air, pumped hydro, thermal storage, there's a lot of different technologies that can play in that space. And they argue that they're more economic in that space. Yeah,
because the argument is they don't have cycle. The cycle cost is much less because they don't degrade like lithium ion does. I think that's the argument. That
is one of the arguments, but there is a sort of dichotomy in how that's set out, because what those sort of companies generally are looking at is then how does the battery degrade when it's a 1 or a 2 hour system or even a 4-hour system. The longer the duration, the lower the C rate, the less the battery actually degrades per cycle. So it gets better actually as you go to 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours.
Hold on. Right. Let's do that maths again. So the longer duration, the lower the C rate. And why does that mean that it degrades less?
Largely because, I don't know if we'll get into the metallurgical point of this, but when you actually test these, right, if you the likes of DNV, for instance, do independent testing and rankings of different battery chemistries at different C rates.
Someone else doing rankings of batteries. I can't imagine it. We should ban them from being mentioned.
You don't have a lab here in this studio.
No, we don't have a lab here.
But they stick. So they put them in a controlled environment, right, under test conditions, say 25 degrees or 21
Yeah.
degrees. Like there are a lot of different. The challenge of this is different batteries have different sweet spots. Some may operate better at 21, some may be operating better at 25. And then how you condition them, how you cycle also is important, right? A full power charge, full power discharge is more degrading to the battery chemistry than the same cycle spread over 24 hours done very gradually, right? So you have to do it in a compared and controlled way.
Okay, so it's about spreading it.
But when you do these cycles, if you take a 2C battery, so that's basically one that can operate at a very high power to energy ratio, so a 30-minute battery, let's call it that.
It's like a 30-minute battery at so a 1 megawatt battery that can do 1 megawatt for 30 hours.
30 minutes up and 30 minutes down.
Yeah.
And then you compare that to a 1 megawatt battery that can do 1 hour up, 1 hour down. That would be a 1C. And then 2 hours up, 2 hours down, half C, 4 hours up, 4 hours down, 0.25, etc. One cycle for each of those, over time, if you map it for 10 years and extrapolate, you'll see a much, much steeper degradation for the high C rate systems than the longer C rate systems. So as you go to longer and longer duration, batteries...
I'm glad you can remember what we were talking about, because I was enjoying that, but forgotten what we were talking about. Yeah, so as we go to longer duration...
So that's where we're coming back to long duration. That's where we're getting to. Essentially, as you go to 4, 6, 8 hours, one cycle... First of all, you can't cycle as much, right? If you mount a 4-hour battery, put aside that batteries charge slower than they discharge, say it's just 4 hours up, 4 hours down, the maximum you can possibly do in 24 hours is 3 cycles. If you go to a 6-hour battery, the maximum is 2 cycles, because 6 hours up, down is 12 times 2. So the longer duration you go...
I've never actually made that connection in my head, but of course that's true. Yeah.
So the longer duration, the less cycling there is, and the better each cycle is in terms of degradation.
Yeah.
So, so first of all, that argument around the degradation point, it is true, batteries do degrade, but much, much less than you might think based on extrapolating from data at shorter duration. And then the second thing is, I would just actually point to real world data, because we are building 4, 5, 6-hour systems around the world. There have been 2 procurements recently for what you'd consider long duration storage, 8 hours.
Just the queso ones,
Yes.
California ones.
And both of those have selected lithium ion as well. So coming back to what is long duration storage, if it's greater than 4 hours, then lithium ion is long duration energy storage already today.
Boom!
Boom! There you go. I can't drop the mic. The mic's fixed. Pen drop.
I want to be interested. I want to know what the flow battery people have got to say about this. We had Ed on from not Fluence, from Infinity before.
Yeah.
It's a very compelling argument, but I can see both sides. But as you say, we're all going in the same direction, so there shouldn't be these factions.
No,
people's front of Judea kind of thing.
Yeah, people's front of Judea, Judean people's front.
Yeah.
The battery front of I don't know. This is not me knocking other technologies, because we still do need other technologies. Excuse me. Other technologies that give you that. So the way I actually think about it and differentiate it is daily storage and longer than daily storage, right? So in my view, actually, lithium ion is perfect for daily storage. So if you look at diurnal patterns, and 8 hours is already getting there, right? Like humans sort of operate in 8-hour shifts, 8 hours sleep, 8-hour work. That's kind of just how we're structured and operate. And we're kind of already at the edges of achieving that now with that there are already operational 8-hour batteries in the world as well that I'm aware of for certain niche use cases. I know we talked about the near-term supply chain, inflection upwards, but actually the long-term trend is still going to be, as more production comes online, these costs keep falling. And so you'll get to
a little wobble. Yeah.
A little wobble, and then 10, 12 hours of batteries will be economical as well. I'm very sure of that. I don't think lithium ion is likely the technology that goes beyond 12 hours, but that's when you get into the space of actually, we're not talking about daily storage anymore within day, it's multi-day storage. And flow batteries scale better for that. There's, same with compressed air, thermal, like hydrogen, you can pick your technology to solve the long duration needs. But the long duration need isn't really a problem we need to solve quite yet. Before we worry about multi-day storage, we need to basically you can get to 80% roughly renewable penetration with daily storage only. And then you're dealing with the last 20% at the moment with flexible gas and other things. So we do need to replace that as well. But on the journey to net zero, that's your next wave of things to solve. It's not the problem today.
Yeah, and every day that it's not now, costs are coming down and efficiency of lithium ion the whole lithium ion world is still got to be careful here because I don't want to say in its infancy, because then it sounds like the technology is immature, and then it sounds like we shouldn't be investing in it because who knows what in the future. But actually, there's a long way to go still, I think, in lithium ion. All right. We talked a moment ago about Ireland. And so a lot of the we're pretty focused on Great Britain. Well, actually, we were until the beginning of this year, and we're doing a load of work in Ireland now too. Do you want to talk a little bit about Ireland? Because I know you guys are very active there. Mm-hmm. And the Irish market, I think, is very cool because it's like their national grid, which is Air Grid, their TSO, basically said when they launched the new services, the frequency response services, let's go space age on this. Let's go as fast as we possibly can, right? And let's hit this. They're aiming for like 90% renewables penetration, right? What do they call it? SNSP. And that's really exciting. And they know they need loads of batteries, and they know they need batteries to respond really quickly.
Yeah.
So what's going on in Ireland?
What's going on? So Ireland, in some ways, very similar to the UK, right? Islanded electricity system, great renewables penetration, arguably even more isolated electrically, right? There's limited interconnection to other countries. So it's basically like an extreme version of GB in the sense of volatility on the grid and needing to solve that. But also because it's quite far ahead at the moment on renewables penetration at the same time. So at the moment, the Irish grid's about 40% renewable electricity over the year. By 2030, they want to get to 80%. Which is a huge uptake.
Absolute legends, aren't they?
It's insane.
Yeah.
So 80,
go Ireland.
But the key takeaway there is 80% on average, right? Wind doesn't always blow.
Yeah.
Right. So there's going to be periods where that's low or zero. So to get to an average of 80, you need to have a power system that can basically operate 100% or near 100%. Really, they're looking at sort of at 95%, I guess, for practicality purposes.
Yeah.
Of non-thermal plants. So that can be batteries and flex. It can be, synchronous condensers. It could be interconnectors, different technologies. But basically, you have to switch off the fossil fuel plants because fossil fuel plants obviously have emitting carbon when they run, and they have minimum generations. You can't ramp a gas plant to zero. You can ramp it down to maybe 40%, 50%, and then you have to switch it off because otherwise it's unstable. So you have to find a way to operate the whole power grid without any thermal power plants. Enter batteries stage right.
And so what do they say that what's the process been? I mean, firstly, props to Ireland for doing this. And if I was an Irish person, I would be very proud that this is happening. I mean, for a government to be that ambitious, that fast, makes everybody else look a bit silly, really. But how are they going about it? How are they getting batteries built?
So the main driver for that, it actually does echo the GB system. So UK, well, I say GB specifically to separate because Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland together are the Irish single electricity market. So this is hence why I say GB, and Ireland I'm using shorthand for the SEM. So GB was first with batteries, first with Kilroot, which I mentioned, although that's technically Northern Ireland, and then with like some of these early EFR projects, so enhanced frequency response in the UK, about 2016 when that auction was run. And Ireland basically followed in the same footsteps, but a couple of years later with what's called the DS3 program, which is shorthand for designing a secure, sustainable energy system, which is a bit of a tongue twister. No one ever says, they always just say DS3 and people expect you know what you mean now. But it's a bunch of products for frequency regulation. So automatic algorithms, basically if the frequency does this, battery should do this. That's basically what it is. The thing that's quite unique about it is just how fast they asked the batteries to go, which is the fastest they've been asked to go anywhere in the world. And there's significant payment scalars for these revenues. You can get paid a tariff, but if you can respond instead of within 2 seconds in 150 milliseconds with the battery, you get paid 3 times as much.
Well, let's do some comparisons here, right? So compared to other frequency response services, or we call them products, but that makes it confusing in my head, but I know they are called products. Compared to other frequency response services, how fast is Ireland? So how fast is the UK versus Ireland? How fast are other countries versus Ireland?
So it depends what you would reference it to, because, for instance, I'd start with FFR, because FFR in the UK, firm frequency response, although it's being phased out, wasn't ever really designed around batteries. It was designed around what thermal plant could do. So actually, the original FFR requirement for response was 10 seconds. Yeah. So 150 milliseconds to 10 seconds, work out that ratio.
Well, I guess you have to respond something in 2 seconds, don't you? It's like You
No,
have
it's
to-
full power.
full power in 10, but you have to do something in 2.
Yeah.
I think so. 2 to 10. So it's like an odd way of describing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it changed as well when they introduced the FR, because that was then a sub 1 second response, and
Yeah.
sub 1 second has been quite common as a requirement in other markets as well. So it really, we're talking about, was it 5 or 6 times faster than a typical frequency response market. The reason that they asked for that
Oh, by the way, this is from 0 to full power, right? So that if you're needed, if the grid needs you, there's a trip somewhere, wind farm trips or interconnector trips or something else. You have to go from 0 to 100% in less than a second. Let's just time a second. 1 click, 2 click, you've done 100%.
Yeah.
Mad.
Yeah,
And then so you're saying they go faster than that.
they go about 5 or 6 times faster than that. Yeah, in Ireland. So it comes down. There's a lot of nuance to exactly when do you start measuring. Like, what's the start point? Is it from an external trigger? Is it internally measured metering? I'm not an expert on the exact nuance and details of those points, but the general trend is there, right? Just take 5 times just to be conservative on it. 5 times faster than a typical frequency response service. So I don't know what 150 milliseconds is. I don't think I can do a clicking like that quick.
And I've probably
faster than that.
Probably by clicking into the microphone, Izzy's looking at me. I think we may have that probably wasn't very good for the sound. So if we've just blown your eardrums,
Gonna have to edit that out.
we have to bring that down. All right, so it's really fast. Why does frequency response need to be fast?
So essentially, because it's more than frequency response. It's actually helping with what's called rock-off, rate of change of frequency. So typically frequency response is the frequency drops, and initially you deal with the drop in frequency with inertia, which comes from thermal mass from spinning engines, rotors, machinery on thermal power stations, which helps arrest and reduce the rate of change of frequency. A very high rate of change of frequency essentially can collapse the grid. So that's bad.
Yeah.
This is why we need inertia.
This is because all the grid's got all these measurement devices, relays around the place that are measuring rock-off.
And then
they trip cities or substations if rock-off goes too fast, because they can't measure actual frequency. So you have to wait for a few cycles in the sine wave, don't you? So instead you measure the angle of the sine wave, which is rock-off.
Yeah, so that's faster to do. It's like maybe gory analogy. It's like chopping off your hand to save your arm, right? Like if you don't do that and you don't shed load very, very fast to readdress the balance of supply and demand, the whole grid goes down.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe that's not the great analogy, because you can repower a city with black start or whatever and switch it back on. I suppose you could resew on a hand, but that's the analogy.
I like the analogy. It's good. So you need to go fast because of rock-off. And how does it work? Does everybody have to respond that fast, or I believe there's an incentive process somewhere.
No, basically that scalar payment I talked about is the incentive, right? The faster you respond, the more you get paid. So although it's a frequency regulation product, the fact that basically why is 150 milliseconds important is usually that's if you're responding that fast, you're not just helping bring the frequency back up after the inertia has kicked in to save the system in the first milliseconds and helping recover it, which is what usually frequency regulation is about. This is actually, if you start adding power before the frequency has finished dropping, you're also helping reduce rock-off.
Yeah.
So that has a lot of value, and particularly on a system where there's going to be lower levels of inertia, which Ireland is ahead of the UK on because it's having this very high renewable penetration and it doesn't have the interconnection and everything else.
Makes sense. So that in British terms, that's a bit like getting paid pounds per megawatt per hour in FFR. So I get paid FFR, but then National Grid says, hey, do FFR. But if you do FFR really, really fast, which is technically very difficult to do, we're going to pay you a bonus.
Yeah.
Because responding fast is worth more to us than responding slowly. That's pretty cool.
That's basically it in a nutshell. Yeah, that's what's happening. So it is basically like, it's funny because dynamic containment came after DS3. So we'd done DS3 first, and there's a lot of questions on, because DC is challenging to deliver as a service, right? Very, very high, that's 20 hertz polling, very precise envelope of response. And DS3 is actually exactly the same, except even harder because it's just an even faster response time. So the fact that we'd done it in Ireland meant that it was relatively straightforward to do in GB. But I know there was a lot of challenges getting DC on for a lot of storage systems, because particularly if you don't have that software integration and controls piece in-house, you're going to have to figure out a patchwork of different providers and speak to someone who does the EMS instead of the batteries and figure it out, or speak to a route to market provider.
What it means is, without going too deep on this, but essentially if you've got a cell and an inverter, so a battery system and an inverter, and that inverter tells the battery what power to output, so how much voltage to come from the battery, it has to do that in a feedback loop and measure and control and measure and control and measure and control so fast and be able to respond so fast. It's a control system question more than anything, isn't it? Because of the feedback loop being so tight. But we're not going to go down PID loops and things like that, although I'd love to one day. That's why this is an energy podcast and not an engineering one.
Absolutely.
So last question, actually second to last question. Which markets are you excited about? Because Fluence is everywhere. So which geographic markets and maybe any other type of market?
So yeah, you can divide this two ways, right? You can look at geography, or you can look at market segments and areas of use cases for batteries, put it that way. So I think actually probably the use case one is a more interesting one to start on, because a lot of batteries, and again, this is the sort of oversimplification that you hear, that batteries are short duration and they're there for frequency regulation. I think that argument has already started to fade away, because now there's an acceptance that batteries are also 4 hours, and that basically does peaking generation roles as well. So a few years ago I was saying peaking generation, but I think that's well established now, at least in the US. But we are actually starting to see, and this is actually a good close-off point on Ireland, because Ireland started with the very, very fast response. But first systems we built in Ireland were 30-minute sort of systems. But we're now starting to see, we're building a large fleet for ESB that are all 2-hour systems, so over 300 megawatt hours of projects that are all there to do DS3, but also to do trading and provide capacity. And in the last T-4, T-3 auction in Ireland, we started to see the first 4-hour batteries actually get contracts. So the duration is increasing.
What do you mean by T-3 there?
So capacity market. Auction. So basically the payment for providing a firm amount of capacity in future years, quite similar to the GV market, the UK market.
Yep.
But we're starting to see longer and longer duration batteries get contracts, essentially, which is giving you a signal. And partly that's coming back to the positive thing right at the beginning. Whilst commodity costs are increasing, and that means energy storage systems in the short term going up, the opportunity, the revenue that they can make is also going up as well. So we actually don't see it killing business cases. If anything, we're getting more demand than we've ever had for the storage systems, because the commodity doesn't just affect storage, it affects gas, right? It affects coal. Marginal cost of gas, the bigger the spread, the more batteries have an opportunity to
It's more like
revenue.
Yeah, we're talking about general inflation across everything, really, aren't we?
Yeah.
Commodities, super cycle, and here comes all the buzzwords.
Exactly.
Okay, so Ireland's really exciting. Any other markets you want to plug?
So I would say, as I said, if we divide not by geography but by segment, then the most interesting one I think is what I will aptly describe as electron teleportation devices, which is the TSO segment. So building virtual transmission lines and using batteries to get electrons from point A to point B without either having to build a power line or without having to reinforce a power line.
Sweet, love this. So a bit like, I don't know why I always talk about the GB system because it's the one I know, but like everybody knows that between Scotland and England there is a thermal constraint. So the overhead lines cannot carry enough power that to meet that is required sometimes. And that's why you see in the newspapers they have to pay wind turbines to switch off in Scotland, because they can't take all that wind power because the wires cannot take it. And so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is put a battery on each end and take some of that wind power from the top in Scotland, and instead of sending it through the transmission line, pull battery from the bottom of the transmission line instead. And so you don't have to put more ugly overhead lines everywhere. You can just put some batteries, some beautiful, pretty batteries at each end.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's one of the ways. There are actually a lot of nuanced ways to it, because a lot of power lines are designed with what's called N-1 contingency, right? So if you see overhead lines, the 3 phases, and there's usually 3 phases on one side, 3 phases on the other. One side of that line should be live and carrying power. The other one's probably not. Or there's a line next to it or somewhere nearby that isn't on. In case one of those fails, you've got a second way to route the power around, right? So the grid is designed fairly conservatively, which is why, fortunately, we don't get too many blackouts these days. But again, same thing. If you put a battery either end of the line with a relay setup, you can actually then say, well, if I then energize the second power line, I can actually carry another, let's say one half carries 500 megawatts, the other half can carry another 500.
Oh, sweet.
You've doubled your energy capacity without having to build anything. And if one of those lines were to fail for any reason, you trip the battery in, and your loss of power is going to be the same as it was had you not used the other line, right?
So provided the cost of that battery, that battery setup is less than the cost of putting the overhead lines in and all the planning permission and all that stuff, then we're talking about existing lines as well. Right?
It could be either, right? So it could be instead of building a new line, or it could be relieving congestion between two existing points. But and cost is one thing, yes, because cost will make a difference. But the second is actually speed, because a power line takes 10 years to get through planning and impact assessments and everything else to build. A battery you can build in a year, right? Or year and a half, depending on the size of it.
Neat. So are any countries actually doing this?
Yeah, so quite a few already. Like we saw early projects of this in the US, but the most interesting European example of this is actually in Eastern Europe. So Litgrid, Lithuania, we built initially a 1 megawatt pilot project at one of their substations, and then more recently it was announced a few months ago that we're now building 200 megawatts of batteries, basically as virtual transmission to to help strengthen the grid and essentially allow one, more renewables, but two, actually also reduce reliance and dependence on like the Baltic Ring, which includes Russia, right? So it's also freedom energy, right? Independence from other power grids.
Very topical. So there's just so many applications for energy storage beyond just will it access frequency response revenues. Yeah. We are only just getting started.
Yeah, and that's why I find it super exciting, because I think frequency regulation very well understood, peaking power probably understood, renewable integration, right? Build batteries next to solar farms and to an extent wind farms, but it's better matched with solar in terms of energy day to night. But that's a whole, at the moment, relatively untapped area. The 200 megawatts is a start of what could be tens of gigawatts, because it is a very different use case, right? It's instead of building power lines, it's the transmission space. It is not the generator space that batteries traditionally get.
Plus all the co-location stuff. We had Bridget on recently from Ørsted talking about offshore wind becoming dispatchable. Mm-hmm. And that as a use case as well. You're looking at gigawatts and gigawatts for that stuff.
Terawatts. This is like the plan. Was it I think it's Bloomberg that project this, right? Up to, I think they increased the forecast. It used to be by 2040 they thought we'd reach a terawatt of energy storage, and now I think it's 2035 or something. So the forecast keeps going up and up. So to finish, if we are finishing, I'm sorry, doing the job for you if that's what we're doing now.
No, we're going to wind up now.
On a very positive note, is despite short-term supply constraint, actually the demand for storage is never larger for all these other reasons, right? We just need it partly to decarbonize, but partly it just helps improve the reliability and affordability and accessibility of energy for everyone.
Absolutely nuts. I sometimes wonder whether I do believe this stuff, right? But then I wonder, do I believe this just because I work in batteries? Is it a coincidence that I work in this industry and I'm really bullish on it, and I think we're only just starting to go down a rabbit hole? And do I live in an echo chamber? Probably yes, but I'm doubling down on it.
There is I think about the same thing, right? It's easy to not realize you're in an echo chamber, and you can be, but
it's like if you have to ask, are we in a bubble? You're probably in a bubble. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, I cut across you.
No, that's all right. I think I'd more or less finish the point just to say, right, the opportunity and the growth. Coming back to the start, we are busier than we ever have been. Like, we are getting more RFPs than we can physically respond to at the moment, which shows you that despite near-term uncertainty on these things, in general, investors, capital flowing into this space are very, very bullish about where energy storage and flexible technologies are going to be.
Awesome. So to finish off, how do people find out more about you? How do they follow you? Anything you want to plug? Now's a chance.
Plug. I wish I had a book to plug. I don't have anything of that nature. So, for me personally, right, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can find me if you're putting show notes out, like my name, it's quite an unusual one, Marek Kubik, Marek Kubik, and you should be able to find me fairly easily. If you want to learn more about Fluence, fluenceenergy.com, and that will take you to where you need to go.
Awesome. Well, Marek, thanks for coming on. Always a pleasure to speak to you, and already looking forward to next time having you on the pod. And for anyone who's watching or listening, thanks for taking the time to listen to us chat. And of course, let us know what you think in the comments, and make sure to follow us. All right, thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.